Good morning!
Yay.
Your face is like sunshine, and how do you do?
It brings us good cheer.
I was singing a different version so that we didn't infringe copyright.
Okay. He is me, I am he. Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah.
I guess I'm sort of glad that only one of you feels...
Like you're being hunted.
Yeah, well, I suppose here's the thing. We said in polar bear, so maybe only one of you feels like the bear in that scenario.
Like you're gonna go
going
hunting.
Tasty, tasty, tasty.
Okay.
So, welcome.
Yeah.
That was Crown Lands doing their version of Come Together, and we're doing that this morning because, of course, the World Cup has started, and probably some of you are there right now.
Wonderful. Good. If you are there,
which is great.
Which is great.
So you know that England just went up 4-0 on Iran.
Amazing. Okay. Okay. Cool. Welcome everyone. We have a story to tell you, and this is cool, and I really hope that you enjoy it.
It's bloody. We should do this around Halloween. Our blood-based stories.
Our blood-based story, yeah. No, it's pretty cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell you about like two things. And what we really want you to do when your brains have time is to be able to kind of understand where these two things are similar and where they are different. It's kind of all part of that theme of like celebrating the diversity of like responses or adaptations or conditions in the world. And so, yeah, we hope that you enjoy it. Yeah? Cool. Are you ready to go? This polar bear eating a narwhal. I don't know if I feel like this polar bear eating a narwhal, but...
What do you feel like the narwhal?
Sometimes
you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug.
What song is that?
I think it's sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug.
Okay. Like, what's the last thing that goes through a bug's brain when it hits a windshield?
Their butts.
Okay. Whew. It's quickly devolving. Here we go. Let's...
Uh-oh.
What?
Iran just got a goal.
Oh, okay.
Updates as required.
As required. Okay.
Oh, it's Mary Chapin Carpenter. It's the bug.
Okay. Good. So what we're going to do, is we're going to tell you about these two physiological things and hopefully introduce you to some very cool species, one of which you are probably pretty familiar with, and the other you may never have heard of. So yay.
There's other ways to be cool about this because we're dealing with extant and extinct organisms. We're dealing with poles, both of them.
Yeah.
It's terrestrial marine. The only thing we're missing is some actual real biodiversity. But this is exciting biodiversity.
Okay. So we're going to talk about molecular biodiversity. Ooh.
A tale of two hemoglobins. It was the best of hemoglobin. It was the worst of hemoglobin.
That's exactly what we're going to be telling you about. So hemoglobin, just as a bit of a review, hemoglobin is that thing that carries oxygen to your muscles and is pretty darn important in the vertebrate world.
Thank you for saying
you were
that.
just gonna actually
no I was going to I was going to yes and you to say it is only one of a number of oxygen carrying molecules, and if this is cool, imagine what's going on in all the other lineages. Come back later and we can talk about that.
Okay. There we go. So let's talk about a very cool vertebrate.
I just heard Ray Romano's voice in my head.
That's right. How can we look at mammoths and not think about Ray Romano's voice anymore?
Or Queen Latifah.
Like, totally. Oh yeah, that's a voice. Okay. Okay. So the woolly mammoth. You want to walk us through the evolutionary history with your Evo speak? No. What do we know?
Yeah,
First of all,
let's not do that now.
What do we know about woolly mammoths? Just like tell us, either here on the slide or in the chat. What do we know about them?
I bet they were tasty. Hairy and big. They're extinct. They're in the Ice Age movie.
They're elephants on steroids. They're
hunted
dead.
to extinction. They are woolly.
They're
Many.
woolly. They look like elephants. Good.
They have horns.
Yep. Tusks.
Hunted to extinction.
Yep. Good.
The first mammoths evolved in Africa.
Very big fur coat, long eyelashes. Good. They're big. Good. Okay. Yep. Those are all Pleistocene. Noor's just going for it. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Tusks. Good. Okay. Excellent. Those are all the things that
and some have been found that are very well preserved. In fact, the rate at which we're finding them is doing nothing but increasing because the melt is increasing. So they're kind of falling out of riverbanks.
Yeah.
I don't remember if we have video of that in this lecture or not, but I can post it in the chat if we don't.
Yeah. There's some very cool stuff that's being found, including like some kind of like pretty freaky stuff, like mammoth skeletons that are not just skeleton, but like full tissue from the knees down, but like totally skeletal on the top, which suggests that they got stuck in mud and then were eaten by scavengers up until like the mud where they were covered. Anyway, like really, I mean, dramatic stories that are being revealed now with the melting of the permafrost and all sorts of things. So it's bananas what we're learning about mammoths these days. And everything that you've said, I think, covers pretty much what most of us know about mammoths. And what we would like to do is share with you a little bit more, if you're up for it, because mammoths are cool. So let's go through pretty much what you just went through, but maybe add some more precision to it, if that's okay. Not that it really matters, but I just think it's kind of cool to understand the context a little bit. So, so we're talking about North America as well as a Eurasial distribution, and we'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. There are lots and lots of morphological adaptations to living in a colder environment, and you totally nailed it. I saw the thick fur and I saw the blubber, like the big fatty layers, not only sort of generally around the body, which is really important, but also sort of protecting the head and the brain, basically. Extirpated from most of their range at the end of the Pleistocene, so about 10,000 years ago. But there are this evidence of these isolated populations that went extinct as recently as 1,700 years ago. And in fact, there was just, I think last year, a big article that did some genetic analysis on some of the last populations to go extinct, suggesting that there were all sorts of genetic sort of challenges, diseases and things like this that had accumulated as a result of inbreeding of those final populations. Cause of extinction is probably a bunch of things, including climatic changes and also then hunting pressure. And now let's talk about the evolution.
So we live in a world where even you know this because you've had your biologists, and so we talk about phylogenies as being hypotheses to which we add information all the time, right? So I'm calling attention here that this green tranche, this slice on the right-hand side representing 2 species of extant pachyderms is actually out of date because we know that the African elephant is actually more than one species, which is kind of amazing. Cryptic diversity, we often, well, certainly I do, who work with little things, we're biased towards saying little things like Collembola. There are lots of undescribed species there, but this is literally like amongst the biggest things we could possibly see on the land, and we have historically overlooked. We can talk about that later on. But in big slices, there's a lineage leading to the elephants of Africa and the elephants of Asia. And you see one of the common, you might have in your early training as biologists come up against 2 words, mastodon and mammoth. And I think this is kind of a cool demonstration that they are very different taxa, separated by many, many years of evolution. The mastodon lineage down here, branching off much earlier, and the mammoth being the sister taxa to the extant lineages that we see today. And you see just by a tusk or a nose hair, leaning into the line and saying nearly extant.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Amazing. And check out this map of their distribution. Now, what I really like about this is a few things. First of all, it kind of looks a lot like the story of the distribution or the range expansion of humans. What I will draw your attention to is this is million years, so it definitely predates what we understand to be the story of humans. So 3 million years ago out of Africa, and then up along in a very similar pattern, but some differences. Do you notice a difference in the story? Can you see like anything that's a little bit different in the story?
What are some of the They stayed where
They
it was
stayed
cold.
where it was cold. That's great. And I wasn't even thinking about that.
That's true.
Amazing. Well done.
They didn't
What else?
push on through.
None in South America. Very good. They did
Yeah.
not push through. That's awesome. Okay.
No.
It stops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's
Okay.
really good.
So what I was looking at,
and not into Australia and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, super good. Yee! Yes, Jacob, we have the same last name. You and I are thinking the same thing. Well done. So, okay, so what I saw was the fact that with every kind of big step, there was a speciation event in a way that there wasn't with humans. Wasn't. Who knows, but probably wasn't with humans. So there are some important differences. You're totally right. Southern Hemisphere, not really conducive to supporting a mammal lifestyle, right? Or mammoth lifestyle. And there were speciation events as a result of the founder effects, right? Sort of the movements that were going on. So well done, everyone. Super good. Okay. And I love the fact that there is this history, at least, and obviously lament the fact that mammoths aren't just wandering around downtown Guelph. How amazing would that be? But there is this overlap of history between the two species that we are familiar with, that we're talking about, right? Humans and mammoths. And if you go to any of the caves, especially those that are in France, and Spain, you'll be able to really appreciate the fact that there was this overlap because humans were drawing the animals that were important to them. And so in caves like Lascaux and Fond de Gaume, you can see these beautiful cave paintings that clearly depict woolly mammoths as well as other very important species to the people at the time. Cool is that? And we made movies about them. No. So with respect to their extinction, obviously, a big question is why. And I think it's really important to recognize in biology, one of the big trends for me anyway, and you can yes and or change it up, is that, when we talk about extinction events, it's very rarely one big thing. We're kind of used to talking about like big meteorites and things like this that are gonna cause a mass extinction. Yeah, sure, that was probably one big thing. But in many cases, extinction events happen because of a complexity or an interaction of different variables. And that's probably what happened here with mammoths. There were climatic changes, but like mammals are pretty resilient. And so maybe if that was the only thing going on, then that might not have been a big deal. But certainly there were pressures from predators like humans that probably changed the ability of mammoths to be able to keep up.
Yes, and there are certainly evolutionary kind of large extinction events that were predominantly large, but drawing some kind of your memory back to some of the slides and some of our discussions in ecology, that with the tree line, for an example, as we zoomed out and we looked at a large spatial scale, it was very apparent what the cause was. And then as you move closer and closer in spatially, it was harder and harder to delineate what had actually happened and where. The tree line became much harder to see than it was when you were quite zoomed out. And temporally in evolution, extinctions are often like that, that there is a large thing that happens in like the Permian or the KT. In the Pleistocene extinction, we don't have a large thing. We have a bunch of things. Yeah. And so kind of nailing down an exact cause, like the smoke, who is it, Horatio? Who's the redheaded guy in the CSI Miami that's like whips his glasses off saying, wow.
Wow.
It's hard to identify that.
Show.
Neither have I. I don't watch any of this. CSI Mammoth is what I would watch that one.
I would watch that one. Yeah, totally. Okay.
So it's often hard to. You need to be doing the detective work, and this is kind of a story about doing detective work, about adding some information to different hypotheses about what had happened.
Yeah. Okay. And let's talk about the molecular level of mammoths. Just a little kind of, again, rundown on hemoglobin. It's a really cool molecule. To me, like when you think about, I don't know, when I think about the complexity of molecules and the relationship between form and function, it just kind of blows my mind. Biology, another sort of big theme about biology is that it often relies on form in order to achieve function. And so just what I mean by this is that, hemoglobin is just really this long kind of molecule of all sorts of things that only works when it's folded in a certain way, right? And so it's the form that really drives the function of the molecule. And this is, it happens all the time in biology. We see it everywhere. Basically what's happening with a hemoglobin is it's this movable molecule, right? You can kind of do this. And in one form, it attracts oxygen, and in the other form, it pushes it away. And so that's how it's able to offload and load oxygen, carry it, and then offload it, and then pick it up and offload it, that kind of deal.
I think it's important, particularly as we're in physiology and talking about the function, to remind ourselves as we're evolutionary biologists that this is really tied into the idea that evolution is not coming up with the perfect solution. It's dealing with what's available.
What's good enough.
And so function and form are intimately tied because evolution can only act on what's there.
Yeah. So the one of several, but the one problem that we're going to be focusing on is the fact that hemoglobin efficiency of doing this.
Characteristic. The one characteristic.
The efficiency of doing this really depends on the temperature. So the colder it is, the slower it is to do this, right? And it's not so good at offloading, okay? When you're talking about a cold adapted species, then you may have some questions about how hemoglobin worked, given that it was constantly being exposed to colder temperatures, even in an endotherm, right? Because one of the things about endotherms is that usually they're, especially ones that live outside, not us, but ones that live outside, usually you don't have the same body temperature everywhere in the body, right? That's called regional heterothermy. Regional meaning places, hetero meaning multiple or two at least, right? Thermy, temperature. So you've got places with different temperatures is what it means.
And you know this because you've touched the end of somebody's nose and it's cold. You've stuck your fingers, your cold fingers in your armpits because it's warm,
right?
And they're cold.
And they're cold. So regional heterothermy. So how were mammoths able to keep their toes warm and oxygenated?
In their armpits, and their noses were cold.
Their noses were cold. Okay, so what was going on with the hemoglobin of the mammoth? See evidence that they had cold toes. Yeah. So how did they deal with it in their cold extremities? Okay, good. You'll forgive us. We're degrading just like everyone else by the end of the semester.
They're like a fine wine.
Okay.
Left on the counter.
Turned to vinegar over time. Okay.
Only good for chips.
Okay. So some folks had these questions, and I think they're great questions. The other thing that I like about these questions is that looking at the list of authors, there's a little bit of diversity here, which we don't usually see. So yay to them. And all sorts of questions related to mammoth. And so not only do we find bones of mammoths, but we actually find biological tissue. It's not fossilized, it is mummified. And so you can do all sorts of really cool things with some of these tissues, recognizing, of course, that a lot of these specimens are taken from all of them are taken from indigenous lands, and many, many indigenous communities do value them. They are ancestors, and so they, not this one, I don't think, but lately, thank goodness, at least, they're being done in conjunction, in partnership with the indigenous communities where they're found. And some very interesting things have come from it. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the hemoglobin research that was done. Basically, they extracted some DNA, so tiny, tiny little bit, and they sequenced it and looked at the mRNA. So this is the the messenger RNA. Oh my goodness. Oh, too many M's. It's Monday. Okay. And then they looked at the sequence related specifically to coding the protein of hemoglobin. Okay, so you can kind of, back engineer, reverse engineer it. Okay. And what did they find?
Well, take a look at the tips of these trees. So these are kind of relationships trees, but we've got the woolly mammoth looking in both of these configurations here, being sister taxa, just as you saw in that larger phylogeny, to the Asian elephant. And again, here. But lots of changes here. And what these researchers, predominantly, not entirely, but at least Kevin Campbell, is at the University of Manitoba in Winterpeg. And I think on this, on the screen behind the coffee mug, I can see it. There is a link. You can go and watch him kind of explain that research, what they've basically found. But it's kind of, they didn't bury the lead. It's in there that the adaptive properties of the hemoglobin that they reconstructed, the extinct hemoglobin, were different. Remember that curve that was in the bottom right-hand side of the hemoglobin slide, where there was a functional curve that kind of ramped up and then dropped off very quickly with increasing temperature? Yeah. The predicted curve for this hemoglobin was different.
You wanna show them? Let's just draw on the predictive curve, right? Okay, cool. So if we go and
I like this.
Yeah?
Yeah, draw it.
You want to draw it?
Draw.
Oh, actually, do you want to draw it, folks? What might it look like?
Do a whiteboard? Just cover the whole thing? No, it's crazy.
It's bananas. Okay, so let's work down here on the function temperature graph. If the mammoth hemoglobin was adapted to work better in the cold, what might that curve look like for its function relative to temperature, where cold temperature is at the origin? Yeah, Winston's nailing it. Well done. Yep. Good. Sweet. Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, and if you all just delete your lines, then we can keep the drawings on the side, because the Sid one is just making me laugh. Cool. Wonderful. That's great.
There's an observation, a good observation that I'm just talking about in responding to in the chat, but I want to bring it up. And that is, wait a second, what? I thought the DNA would have degraded by then. And this is just so in this kind of first step, DNA is so resilient. So there's that. It is very resilient to damage. And we're pretty good, particularly with PCR, about kind of building a story from fragmented stretches of molecules that would have been long, continuous threads. One of the first way it degrades is as it breaks down into smaller chunks. Yeah. We can stitch those together. We kind of know analytically, methodologically how to do that. Two other things, though. Remember, this is not that long ago.
Yeah.
It's in the bigger picture of things. It's not that long ago. And so many of these are dependent upon us finding things that have been frozen probably since death and not thawed since then. And that kind of, so a freeze-thaw routine is really what accelerates damage to DNA.
Yep.
And so keeping it moist and frozen there's a lot there to work with. I put in the chat a link to a video of some ethical ivory harvesting that goes on now in Siberia, just as a measure of what you're actually looking at when you're looking at mammoths being pulled out of the ground.
And so stable DNA in terms of like, it's probably, so my work in biomimicry and biomimetics touches a lot on this, because one of the things that people are really interested in is stable information storage, right? Engineers are always trying to find ways of storing information for long periods of time. And it turns out that DNA is the best information storage technology that we know about. So
wait, it's not a Hewlett-Packard printer?
It is not.
That runs out of ink?
Well, so do you remember CDs? Do you know what a CD is? Yeah? No? Terrible technology, because we don't use them anymore. So everything that was put onto a CD is like lost unless it was transferred, right? And one little scratch and that would be the end of it, right? Or a hard drive, one drop, and that was the end of it, right? Absolutely terrible. DNA can be beaten up and pulverized and like abused. And like 70,000 years later, you can still get some kind of reading on it, which is bananas. And so there are people who are developing DNA printers and storing text in DNA using a binary code. And then they're going to shift over, of course, right? It's not a binary code. It's got 4. It's a quaternary code, and has an incredible power to it with respect to data storage. So yay, DNA.
Definitely yay, DNA.
Yeah.
There's some objections and yes ands and no buts. We're not that old, but yes and yes. And watching Transformers and the Iron Giant.
On VHS. Wow, and I used to watch it on Betamax.
That's all right. I was old enough to not have any options to watch anything.
That's right. Okay, so we're already
What did we watch? The Wind.
Okay. So the hypothesis is that, what might we predict then? The hypothesis is that the woolly mammoth had hemoglobin that were specially adapted, right? So we've got our functional curve, that's our hypothesis, and now we want to go and actually test it, right? So what we might test then is that the woolly mammoth hemoglobin structure will actually be evidence of convergent evolution with other Arctic mammals who might be going through a similar type of challenge, okay? And so you can analyze the protein, the hemoglobin, and you can take a look. And in fact, this is what happened. They made mammoth hemoglobin. It's cool. And what they found was that the mammoth hemoglobin was more efficient at cold temperatures than elephant hemoglobin, and that the mammoth hemoglobin uses similar mechanisms like muskox or reindeer. So is this an example of shared ancestry? So of yes, of divergent evolution, homology, or is this an example of convergent evolution?
Take out your hearts.
Good.
You're right. It's much less parsimonious to presume that whatever the shared ancestor back far enough that unified muskox, reindeer, and woolly mammoth, and a lot of other vertebrates, it's much less parsimonious to presume that they had this ability. So it's kind of a neat example of contemporary, extant and extinct taxa with convergently evolved solutions to dealing with the cold.
Nice. Nice. Look, they named this one Love.
Luba. I think that's what the little one, the baby in that science paper was named.
Oh,
I think so.
It means love in Russian. That's adorable. Okay. Yay. Okay.
I think some of you guys know this story better, or maybe like you're very attached to this story. So correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah.
About the name.
Cool. Okay. So yes, Asian elephant and woolly mammoth hemoglobin were different. The woolly mammoth was able to function in colder temperatures much more efficiently than the Asian elephant hemoglobin. So amazing.
Now, some of you have talked about this in the chat already, which is aren't there some people who are using a lot of money to try and de-extinct the mammoth?
Haven't they watched Jurassic Park?
It always ends well. It always ends well. And a quick shout out to crane flies, which was actually the insect in that.
Oh.
It's not a mosquito. It's just a crane fly, so it's not a blood feeder. But one of the
that must have really bothered you.
There would you should have heard the nerds going ha ha, wagging their fingers so vigorously there was a wind in all of the theaters.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay.
So one of the things, and there are links here you can go to Colossal and read about their plans, but their plan is to use CRISPR to edit extant DNA, introduce traits from woolly mammoths. And why would they do this? Their reasoning is that a lot of the carbon storage that we are modeling and presuming will continue into the Anthropocene, the rest of the climate crisis future, the maintenance of that carbon storage in the permafrost is about trampling, is linked to trampling. And that was about the large animals like the mammoth that were compacting it. And that when we don't have it, when we don't have the trampling, when we don't have the compaction, those permafrosts melt more easily. Therefore, if we could CRISPR up a solution that would stamp its energies out across the steppe, then we would have more storage of carbon dioxide.
Wow.
It's a lot of steps, and I mean that as a pun and also literally. But tell us your thoughts. If you've got some, and I bet you have some thoughts about the wisdom of this in a conservation perspective, in a climate crisis perspective, in a
how cool is that perspective?
In a how cool is that perspective? In a not about us, without us perspective.
Yeah.
Is it something, have people who live there actually asked for this?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a large neighbor to say we're going to,
Here, mammoths.
Today, mammoths.
In your backyard.
Good luck.
Cool. Okay. So, we're going to skip this because we want to tell you about the other thing, which is this. Okay, ready? So, that was mammoths. We are now on to something completely different. I have 15 minutes to tell you about how amazing Antarctic ice fishes are, right? Ice fish is many ice fish. Ice fishes is many species of ice fish. Okay, so there are many species of ice fishes, and they are amazing, and they look like this. And so, of course, they're called ice fish because they look icy, and they live in very, very cold temperatures. And they are Antarctic, so they are southern polar hemisphere. There are 16 species. They are definitely a dominant taxon within the Antarctic marine environment. And they live in the coldest of liquid water. Okay, so they're living in minus 2 degrees Celsius to about 2 degrees Celsius. It's frickin' cold. And they look like this. And then some of them are more completely transparent, but the vast majority of them are at least translucent and beautiful and also delicious. Just saying. Okay, the thing about them. Now, remember how we talked about hemoglobin being kind of like really important in the vertebrate world? Well, these fish don't have hemoglobin. Like nothing. Not even baby hemoglobin. They don't actually have functional red blood cells. And the hemoglobin gene is gone. And they also have these unusual things like really high blood volume. So they have a lot of blood compared to most fish. Their blood vessels are way bigger. So the circumference of the vessel itself is actually really big. So it holds more volume, of course. And circulation costs them a lot. They have really big heart muscles. Okay. But let's just take a look. So here's our ice fish. Isn't it pretty? It's got such a fancy fan.
I think sea dragons, that's what they've been called in the chat, and I agree.
Yep.
Little sea dragons.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay, and here, this right here in box A, this is ice fish blood. And this...
Like, pause for a second.
Is like,
for effect. That's crazy.
Chong, chong, chong. Okay, and this is like salmon blood, right? This is an ice fish gill, and this is like a salmon gill.
Both of them full of blood.
Right?
Both of them working.
Bananas. How can they survive? I love this fish. Okay, so let's take a look at its evolutionary relationships with some other fish. We have a whole bunch. So all of these here are Antarctic fish. So it's not that all Antarctic fish are ice fish. There are some non-ice fish that live there, including all of these, right? The nautiloids, for example, is a pretty popular group of fish that can be found quite regularly. But also here, where we look, we can see hemoglobin loss in this one group of the ice fish. Okay, what else do you notice when you look at this?
They're all weird looking.
Mm-hmm. They are pretty weird looking. And secondary loss of antifreeze proteins in some species. So some of them have lost their antifreeze proteins. That's going to say a lot about where they are in the water column and how far south they can actually go. And here we have the appearance of the antifreeze proteins. So some of the nautiloids don't have antifreeze proteins, for example. That's one conclusion that we can make. Okay, so.
I love that when we teach this is a defining character state for a group, and then one of them is like, yeah, well, I don't do that. That's not for me.
That's not for me. But it doesn't mean that we take it out of that group.
Oh, not at all. We again, touching back to evolution via loss, not by accumulation. This is another example. Just like flight, we talk about flight with birds and with insects.
Yeah. What's their deal? This guy here, yeah, totally. Bananas, right? But look, this one is the sea dragon.
See?
Right?
You were right.
Bathydraconidae.
Yeah.
I
am a dragon in the bathtub.
No, I think it just means deep.
Deep, yes, exactly. But it's funnier to think about it.
Okay. There we go. And so, yes, notice the red circle. Why do we have the red circle there? Let's get rid of the red circle. Okay. So I'm going to attempt to interpret this.
Go Jacobs. Go Jacobs.
Because to me, what it suggests is that these things are really bananas. Like they have been hacked up to pieces within their DNA. You're like, whoa. Okay. But what we've got then are a series of fragments of sort of hemoglobin of other fish, right? This is like the code, right? And this would be the equivalent in the 14 ice fish for what's still there, remnants. So it does suggest that there is a legacy of the existence of hemoglobin, but it certainly suggests that there has been some massive information loss at the level of the hemoglobin. Is that good?
Yep.
Did I do good?
You did well.
Look at me. Okay.
But I think so, and it's all, I like the way that it's plotted as well, because it shows you in a couple of cases
the equivalence
with the bathydraconids and the nautiloids
Yeah.
that there's still more of that architecture around. They haven't lost all of it. And then you look at the size of those popsicles at the tips of the tree on the right hand side.
Yeah. Anyway, pretty cool, right? Okay. So these things are not going to like re-evolve hemoglobin. It's just not possible. Like with chickens, you can like turn on a gene and they'll have teeth, which is gross. But those genes, that information for teeth is still there in a way that it is not for ice fish.
And in the not gross example that we talked about in class, the loss, the frequency of loss of flight within insects,
right.
that genetic architecture was still there, and that's one of the reasons that after it's lost, it re-evolved, it reappeared in the phylogeny. Whereas here, this is the architecture is gone. They've
It's a
cut it out, literally.
tragedy. Okay. And basically, no functional hemoglobin, no red blood cells. The hemoglobin gene has been lost, right? So this is what the ice fish, WTIF, because it's been this huge, like, when I was doing my PhD, I was with, at the same time in my labmate was Dr. Leonardo Magnoni, who is now a professor, and he had done his master's on the ice fish in Antarctica. There was tons of research that was being done because you might be able to think about some of the, hemoglobin-related diseases that humans experience. How can we learn from this kind of deal, right? So that was kind of what was going on, which was really cool. And people really thought that it revealed these incredible adaptations to extreme environments. Okay, so like this was amazing. This made them more beneficial somehow, and all of the research was on, how does this adaptation benefit the physiology of the fish to be able to survive? Cool. And there's something in biology or biological philosophy called the just so story. It's something that we as humans are kind of prone to do, which is why there's a term for it, right? And it comes actually from this Panglossian paradigm, if you're interested in philosophy, this philosopher, Pangloss, is a character in a story who goes around to different worlds and different ways of living. And every time that he gets there, he goes, surely this is the best of all possible worlds, right? And so we tend to do that. Surely this is the best of strategies for living in the environment, right? So we see something unusual and we're like, oh, it's an adaptation, right? Except for, hopefully in this course, one of the things that we're trying to get you to think about is the possibility that it's not this just so story, right? That it's not necessarily an adaptation. So what we want to do is we want to see if, can we tap into that and go, well, maybe it isn't, right? So think about it. Why might it not be an adaptive strategy, right? So if hemoglobin loss is not adaptive, how could this trait be common? How could it evolve? What mechanisms in evolution might exist to allow for something that isn't necessarily adaptive to evolve? Just kind of think about that for a sec. Sam, you're not wrong about the evolution of maladaptive traits often being the result of sexual selection. It doesn't apply in this case, but
you're not wrong.
But you're not wrong, not at all.
There's lots of, as you can immediately think, lots of ridiculous things.
Ridiculous. Peacock's tails, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mutations. Fish with that mutation were immigrated to a habitat where the mutation was more beneficial. You're on
the right path, but don't use beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Genetic drift. Nice, Merrick. Yep. Yeah. Or Eric.
Yeah, and it didn't kill it, so it just kind of kept it.
Really good.
Yeah.
Random chance, genetic, brilliant. Yes. Yep. Yeah. You're getting there. More advantageous. No. We're not talking about adaptation, so let's switch it around, going the meh kind of route. Okay? And it's really hard, right, to think about things that are just kind of meh, but in this particular case, it was just kind of meh, right? So what does that look like when bad things happen to good fish? So the whole thing is, the whole story is basically, we have time for this. Okay. Basically, there was this catastrophic mutation that happened that knocked out, and it might not have been one mutation, but a series of mutations or things that happened that knocked out the hemoglobin in the ice fish lineage. And at the same time, probably a massive reduction in the population as a result of a bottleneck, okay? So reduced genetic variation. and also this pretty, massive loss of hemoglobin, this big mutation event. Now, the thing about it is that Antarctic water is actually hyperoxygenated. Cold water holds more oxygen than warm water. And I know that might sound counterintuitive, but cold water can host more life, maybe not more diverse life, because you have to be adapted to being in the cold, but it can actually hold more life than warm water. And you know that warm water holds less oxygen because when you boil a pot of water, you put cold water on the stove, okay, and over time it starts to boil and bubble. And those bubbles are releasing dissolved oxygen that are in the water, okay? So your hot water has less oxygen than your cold water. It has to do with the energy of the molecules and the fact that warm water molecules occupy more space, okay? And they push out things, right? Okay, so cold water has a lot of oxygen, and it can support a lot more phytoplankton and plankton and the whole food web of things that are adapted, and fish. So in this hyperoxygenated environment, the loss of hemoglobin for the ice fish lineage was kind of like meh. And subsequent adaptations like this high blood volume, these large hearts, these very expensive circulation evolved in order to kind of adapt for it. But think about the transition and then the need for it, and for these other adaptations, these subsequent adaptations. It's bananas. So these things basically get their oxygen that are directly dissolved in the blood, that aren't carried by any molecule. So the high blood volume allows for enough oxygen to be able to get to the muscles. Bananas. Okay, but it is not an adaptation.
And you know this about water, because if you drink coffee, you make it with cold water.
Yummy.
Because it's the oxygen in that cold water, the difference in the cold versus hot water, that is related to the taste of the coffee that you're drinking, or the tea.
Right? Okay, so here's a little abstract and a story about the ice fish. Okay, and what? Well, that's stupid.
Well, that's stupid.
Oh, did we kill it?
No. Evolution proceeds. That is kind of a consequence, an observation of a process like evolution that proceeds by just good enough or with the materials on hand. When you're like, well, that's stupid, or well, that's not ideal, and it's like, yes, and ta-da.
Wonderful. Okay. So anyway, here's the story, and what we've done is we've kind of highlighted some words, and what you can do when you're kind of prepping for the next topic test or whatever is take a look and learn these words, and also what they mean, what connections they make to some of the things that we've been talking about with respect to evolution. So one thing that you might want to look at is low population connectivity. Low population connectivity. That to me brings out barrier to gene flow, for example. So see if you can connect it to different concepts that we've done already.
There's a whole bunch of this course in that abstract.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and while you're doing that, here, a little thing to help you. So we're going to take this up next time.
2 more slides.
2 more slides?
Yeah.
Okay, this is your homework. Oh, and this is your homework. Lots of homework. And this will hopefully be helpful to you. So what we've got is a bunch of questions. It starts out pretty easy, where you can put down what they are, and hopefully by the end, you will understand where they differ in the stories. And one more slide.
And if you like the ice fish story, it's written about in this book, which is kind of an adventure story in the study of evolution. And one of the chapters is about our early understandings of ice fish evolution. And that is, you can buy the book, or you can click on the link when you get the PDF of the lecture later on, because it is linked to a PDF that you can just read.
Awesome.
There we go.
Thank you so much for today. We had a lot of fun.
See you Wednesday.